2023 is gearing up to be the hottest year on record, officially putting us on a path to the end of life as we know it. So why are young activists, those least responsible for the climate crisis, the only ones loud enough in sounding the alarm about our planet's future? I'm Anelise Borges, and this is The Stream.
Hello, my name is Louise. I'm 24 years old, and I'm here. I'm here because I don't have a future.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
Politics is failing us.
I'm terrified I'm going to live in constant fear of climate disaster.
So let's fight together to hold fossil fuel companies accountable.
And the best part of this plan is, no one can stop me.
As world leaders convene in Dubai for COP28, just how serious are they about tackling the climate crisis? The task ahead is enormous, and so is the urgency. But for now, there seems to be lots of talk and not enough action. Will the world continue to put profits over planet, despite the impact on our Earth and on our future? To discuss this and more, with us today are Disha Ravi, one of the founders of Fridays for Future in India. She's joining us from Bangalore. Maria Reyes, an eco-feminist, joining us from Puebla in Mexico. And Emma de Saram, an organizer for Just Stop the Oil, who is in Exeter in the UK. Thank you so much, girls, for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you, Emma, Maria, and Disha. Can I start by asking the three of you, what made you get involved in this fight? Did something happen one day that you guys woke up and say, I actually need to fight for the future? Disha, I would like to start with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, for me personally, my grandparents are farmers. I saw that they were impacted by the climate crisis because they were suffering due to the lack of water in their region. I didn't understand back then why this was happening or how it was even connected to the climate crisis. And it was only after I grew up that I saw that this was the case for a lot of other Indians across the country. And that's what led me to join the climate movement.
Maria, what about you? What is your story?
I think in Puebla, where I come from, my family has always experienced water scarcity. Since I have memory, it's a problem that we have struggled with. So for me, it wasn't necessarily fighting about the future. It was fighting about the present and fighting for our daily needs. So seeing my grandmother, my aunties, people in our community organizing to distribute water made me realize we are in a climate crisis, but that is connected to socioeconomic challenges. And that really made the issue very intersectional and present for me.
Emma, what about you? What made you join this fight?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it kind of started when I was around 16, 17, especially just working like normal jobs and seeing how much kind of like capitalism was distracting everyone from huge global issues. I started like reading more about the climate crisis aged kind of 17. And I started like getting involved on like a very local level, but it was kind of halfway through university where I was kind of like doing things, you know, doing like the divestment campaigns, doing things. I guess palatable action wasn't enough. It didn't meet the urgency of the climate crisis, and that's when I got more involved with Just Stop Oil. So yeah, it's been a journey.
I bet it's been a journey. I mean, the three of you are part of a generation that is definitely attracting a lot of attention to this fight, especially with regards to some of the techniques applied to the climate protests.
With the song, we can sing it forever. Hey, look at me.
Remember when a bunch of climate activists on bicycles shut down a private jet runway at Amsterdam Schiphol Airport last year? Because I sure do, since it was one of the most hilarious climate protests I have ever seen.
Security.
Emma, I want to ask you about the Van Gogh soup protest, because that obviously went absolutely viral. But it also put the activists there in the spot to a certain extent. I remember I was living in France at the time, and watching the media cover this particular event was quite interesting, especially with some commentators, normally white, middle-aged men, who were criticizing the action and saying that this was the behavior of climate terrorists. Did you hear some of these criticisms, and what do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, that action, Phoebe and Anna, throwing the soup on the sunflowers, it really did go global. It went viral, and I remember it so well, just like seeing the reactions of the media. But what is art on a dead planet fundamentally? And I think like the creativity of that action really kind of drew attention to like the absurdity of the climate crisis in a way. And yeah, obviously we saw the criticisms, we saw the reactions, but at the end of the day, especially in the UK context where, we see the impacts of the climate crisis, but it's not immediate. So that's why we know we need to be doing these actions. And obviously in like normal circumstances, throwing soup on a painting would be like absurd. But we're not in normal circumstances. We know we're in a climate emergency, and we're kind of doing everything we can to disrupt the status quo. And that was very much like what kind of the sunflowers action was about. It was like, how do you engage people? And I think through that action, a lot of people in the art world became engaged in it.
Got to hear what you had to say. Maria, what about you? Do you also feel that you have to resort to more unconventional, creative methods to actually get your message across?
Yeah, I think with this point, I would really like to address the narratives and how I'm also part of this movement called Fridays for Future MAPA, and MAPA stands for Most Affected Peoples and Areas. And so I really want us to reflect on how, especially from 2021, we have seen an increasing wave of activists from the Global South taking a stage into the global conversation about the climate crisis. And with putting us into the front line of this conversation, we have been changing the narratives. So it's not only now talking about missing a Friday of classes to strike. I can actually tell you that most of the people that we know in the Global South, we don't necessarily strike in the same way that gets very like viral and popular in like, the European continent, because those things would be dangerous for us. We have to be super creative on the ways that we advocate for climate justice and climate liberation. And I just wanted to reflect on the importance of addressing this type of narratives that have been resulting from those type of actions, because calling someone a climate terrorist in Europe might not be a big thing, because if people get arrested, it might be even funny, something that it happened to you, but your rights are going to be respected. But when those climate narratives are picked in our territories in the Global South, that is actually very dangerous for us. Because when our governments,
the consequences
when our governments
are enormous,
target us as terrorists, which in Mexico has happened. The National Guard and the Secretary of Defense have a list of groups that they recognize as a threat for the national security, and there are indigenous movements and feminist movements in there, put at the same level as terrorist organizations and narco-traffic organizations. So it is very important that we are present in the conversation and we tackle these narratives, because it can be really harming for some of us.
Absolutely. And Disha, you actually experienced some of that kind of pressure yourself. You were arrested in 2021, if I'm not mistaken, for helping to create a toolkit outlining ways to support farmers in your country protest against a then new agricultural law. Do you get a sense that perhaps in India and around you, there's a real push on the part of governments to criminalize this kind of behavior, this kind of action?
There is. In the past few years, especially, it has gotten much, much worse. Fridays for Future India and me personally, we've been targeted quite a few times. Like Maria was saying, they use the tactic of framing us as terrorists. I've personally been called a terrorist for a really long time now and very publicly in a lot of places. Um, and Fridays for Future India was actually booked under the charges of UAPA, which makes any organization a terrorist organization before I even got arrested. That's so it was in 2020. It was later withdrawn, but we have constantly been under watch and under threat. Not just climate activism, but any form of activism and dissent in India is criminalized to a large degree. A lot of activists are constantly jailed. The reason that India isn't higher on the global witness list of activists who like areas in which it's dangerous to be an activist is they don't really have to kill us. They can just throw us in jail and forget about us because we have such rigid laws that it's incredibly hard to get bail. Like the UAPA, for example, which we got booked under, you don't need a reason. You don't like the police don't need to show a reason to keep you in jail. You have to actively prove that you're innocent versus the normal assumption that you're innocent until proven guilty. That assumption goes out of the window for the UAPA, and like you don't get bail for years on end. There have been people who've gone without trial for like even a decade or longer, and they've not been able to get bail.
How
So it's
unfair
really
is this? I mean, Disha, it seems to be, again, unfair, unjust with you guys, the ones that are the least responsible for this crisis, who are actually trying to fix a problem that others created for you, and yet you're actually paying a very high price for it.
Yeah, it is very unfair because we are quite young. This is the start of our work. It's only going to, the climate crisis is only going to get worse from here. So we are going to keep putting pressures both within our country and outside so that leaders can act on this. And it's very important for us to be able to be safe while we do that.
I want to bring something that Maria was talking about in terms of we're not all responsible for this crisis equally. According to a study by the Lancet Planetary Health, the world's richest countries, known as the Global North, have been responsible for 92% of global emissions since 1850. 40% of those emissions come from the US, 29% come from the EU. So who should really pay the price to tackle the climate crisis? This climate activist has the answer.
Devastating cyclones in Mozambique, deadly droughts in Somalia, massive floods in Uganda. The continent least responsible for this climate crisis is suffering the most. Meanwhile, rich, predominantly white countries continue to exploit our planet and prosper at our expense. The truth is, you can't have climate justice without racial justice. The Global North has a climate debt to pay, and I intend to hold them to it.
Maria, I believe you were mentioning before that the climate crisis is very much the present for the Global South and not the future. It's not something that is coming at you. It is already a reality. Can I get your take here on what this activist just posted on YouTube?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I very much agree. And I think it is very important also to make the emphasis on how are these countries and these people in the Global North responsible for it. And then that conversation is going to take us to target the fossil fuel industry. That is one of the roots of, like one of the main roots of the climate crisis. And if we go even deeper into what is the root of the fossil fuel industry and this mindset of supremacy of putting profit over people and the planet, we will understand that it is also colonization. The climate crisis is a symptom of a bigger sickness that started in the continent where I come from, in the Abya Jala. It started around 500 years ago when the people from Europe sailed across the ocean and they started conquering our land and they started conquering our ancestors. So that was the main root of everything. That's when people and the planet started being profited from. That's when people and the planet started being exploited. And so because of that, now we have a global economic system that is based on the profits of exploiting people in our territories. And a medium for that is the fossil fuel industry. So especially now that we are heading into one of the most important climate talks in the year, which is COP, it is very important that we keep putting the finger into the main topic, colonization and the fossil fuel industry, and the responsibility that some countries have to phase out of fossil fuels.
We've been talking about a pretty dire situation for the climate, but just how bad is it? Here's our producer, Joanna Hose.
The world is burning. Rivers are flooding. Crops are dying. The clock is ticking on the planet. 2023 is likely to go down as the hottest year on record. Globally, this October was a staggering 1.7 degrees Celsius hotter than the pre-industrial average for that month. And that's not a one-off or a coincidence. Yes, natural processes like climate patterns can cause shifts in temperatures, but since the Industrial Revolution, us, humans, have been the main drivers of climate change. And if you look at 2023 alone, the impact that is having on the planet is catastrophic. We've seen unprecedented heat waves. Italy experienced Europe's hottest day in history at 48.8 degrees Celsius. On the other side of the globe, in California's Death Valley, the highest temperature on Earth ever was recorded, a whopping 56.7 degrees Celsius. And if these scorching temperatures and the many deaths it caused sound alarming, well, it doesn't end there. Torrential rains causing floods in Libya this September marked the deadliest extreme weather event in 2023, killing at least 5,000 people. And these kind of numbers are only going to get worse. So if this is what the future of climate change, the future of our planet looks like, why are those in power still so slow to act?
Emma, I would like to bring you into the conversation here. COP28 is here, a massively important but massively expensive, one would say, conference. Do you see enough come out of these conferences?
I mean, in short, no. I went to COP26 2 years ago when it was in Glasgow. And to be honest, what came out of that for me was just this realization of like just the huge global injustice that I was even like there, and I even kind of had a voice there. I did one particular panel with an activist from Rio, and I just remember him telling me about how he'd, had to spend like his entire about 2 years kind of trying to get funding to even be at COP26. And for me, like an activist in the global north, in, the imperial core, it was like obviously like an extreme privilege that I was even there and I was even kind of like contributing to the discussions. But I mean, what we've seen out of COP26, especially from like the UK perspective, is just, empty promises. And I think if world leaders kept to their word at COP26, COP27, all of the COPs, we would be in a better situation. But my feeling of being there was, it was just a lot of, empty words, and kind of like a big media opportunity for world leaders to kind of make promises. But I really hope that we do have, and I think more and more I've seen like in the coverage of it, we've seen like Indigenous voices and Indigenous leaders having a bit more of a presence, not enough, obviously. But yeah, in short, it's not enough. It's not enough, but it's also not black and white. And I think it's a necessary part of like the broader ecosystem.
Disha, do you agree? And if you think there's also very little that comes out of these meetings, what would you like to see instead?
I personally think that COP has been the biggest PR event for climate every single year, where world leaders like race to speak on how much they're acting on the climate crisis instead of actually doing the action. I feel like a lot of them have pushed for really false solutions or throughout the years, which has delayed real climate action. They've pushed for false solutions like CCS, that is carbon capture and storage, or carbon markets, carbon credits, geoengineering, which have proven over the years that they are not as effective or not as scalable, but they continue to push for it. They continue to waste time. That a lot of us don't have, that a lot of us are suffering at the moment, and it is a very dangerous distraction that they are playing it, that they're pushing for, and we demand real action from these conferences. But I'm personally losing hope with every conference because it somehow gets worse, and there's not much action taken each time. So yeah, I don't want to place my hopes on conferences. My hope comes from the movements that I organize with, that have been pushing for change.
We're approaching the end of the show, and I want to get the three of you to go through three very concrete things that you would like to see happen in the next few years that could actually have a decisive impact here. I mean, we talked about how hopeless some of these meetings are and how difficult it is to just see politicians using this as a photo op and a platform to get re-elected. But what should we be doing? What should governments be doing? What should communities like yours, students, young people, be doing? Emma, I would like to start with you. Three things that you think should be happening right now.
I think number one is to end the licensing of new coal, oil and gas. That's the main demand for Just Stop Oil. Number two, I think for all climate movements, especially those in the global north, to take a truly intersectional approach, which, you know, embeds the need for like racial justice, gender justice, a free Palestine in its demands. And lastly, I'd like to see everyone being able to kind of be involved on a local level and connect that to the global need for climate justice. I think it's very difficult otherwise to take on like this huge fossil capital system, but for people to be involved on a local level.
Maria, your take.
The only one way out is an equitable fossil phase out. So we need countries at COP28 to commit to an equitable fossil phase out that includes a just transition, not only for the workforce, but also for the solutions that are implemented for the energy transition. We need to exclude oil and gas representatives from all UNFCCC conferences. We need a conflict of interest policy, because if the fossil fuel lobbyists are present in the climate negotiations, the UNFCCC space is going to lose all credibility. And as a youth movement, we need to build alternative spaces to strengthen our calls for climate justice. Climate justice is not going to be achieved. We're going to build it with our hands and with our own ground organizing.
Disha, your take.
I agree with what both Maria and Emma mentioned. For me personally, I would really like to see debt cancellation and reparations paid by the global north countries to the global south countries, because it has been their fault. It has been historical emissions and colonization that caused this crisis. And it's also very important for them to acknowledge and pay up for it, while we also endorse a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, so that we can all move towards a just transition and a planet that isn't reliant on fossil fuels to function. And I also think it's really important to center the protection of environmental defenders around the world, to ensure that those who are asking and demanding for the protection of our planet in like clean air and basic human rights are not implicated, they're not imprisoned or killed.
Disha, Maria and Emma, thank you so much for joining us the stream today. And thank you as well for watching. If you have a comment about our show, you can talk to us on social media. And if you have a conversation or a topic that you'd like to share, this is also very much your show. So we are always open to your suggestions. You can use the hashtag or the handle AJStream and we'll look into it. Take care and I'll see you soon.